You're listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not so bad. Yourself?
Good. I'm in my new recording studio. What do you think?
Well, it's definitely a different backdrop for sure. I see an unhung picture in the corner and a plain background, which is very much like mine. I have not figured out what to do with the wall behind me yet as I've been moving stuff around in my office, but I like the natural lighting.
Well, I'm actually liking this, what is it, around 4:30 here, 4:30 p.m. And the amount of lighting is just enough so you can see me, but it doesn't highlight every flaw on my face, every wrinkle and every line. So I'm actually pretty good with 4 o'clock. When I set this up, it was about 2 o'clock, and I have a southern exposure on my, again, just to level set for everybody. We're in the U.S., in the Northern Hemisphere, obviously. So southern exposure, I got the sun beating in through my window. And around 2 o'clock this afternoon, it was like, the vibe didn't match with my normal vampire mode. Normally I like to work in the dark, and like somebody opens a window, it's like, the light.
You would love the Samsung beauty filter on the Android phones that they have that like does this just over the top aggressive smoothing of facial like tones and features and things like that. That's definitely a way to go. But that's also why we do an audio podcast, because as have always said, we've got faces for radio and voices for a silent movie. So that's just how we roll here.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we ever go video, it's going to be the Snapchat version, kind of like you were talking about there.
Well, people are going to see us at the Authenticate conference. So we're recording this a couple weeks early because we'll be out, doing that. So hopefully that'll go well for us. But it'll be interesting just getting out in the world again and meeting the Identarati.
Well, we can always tell people it's like, this is the COVID-15, I mean, we were indoors for the last 18 months, eating food and not exercising. And
that number is adjustable, right? So if I said, this is like the COVID-30 or COVID-40, right? I think people would get that.
I think the joke plays.
All right. Well, why don't we talk identity? Because I think that's enough inane banter for today. We're going to get to a pretty interesting conversation, one that I think is going to maybe have questions that we don't all have answers for, but I think it's a good time to bring these up because of the prevalence, and that's really around identity in the public sector. So things like identity orchestration, identity proofing, those sorts of things, and really to kind of help explain some of the challenges and opportunities that we have around that. We're welcoming back to the show Mike Vesey. He's the CEO and president at IdRamp. Welcome back to the show, Mike.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be back.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. So you were with us all the way back in November of 2019, one of our very first guests, episode number 21. And now we're in the 100 and teens. I want to say like 118, somewhere in that area. So it's been a while. What's new with IdRamp? Because the last time we talked was around kind of blockchain identity, and we had a pretty good conversation and trying to see what are the use cases around it. So what's new at IdRamp? And maybe you can also take this opportunity to kind of refresh us. What is it that IdRamp looks to solve?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. A lot has changed, and yet a lot is the same. So I'm happy to be back and talk about where we're at today versus a couple of years ago, and some of the things that we're seeing, especially in public sector, because man, that's an area right now that is moving at light speed, which is not typical for public sector, right? Normally those things are very slow and deliberate, and we're seeing a lot of transformation now because of driven by necessity. The world changed about 18 months ago. So IdRamp, we're still primarily focused on really the identity orchestration journey. So we're helping organizations, enterprise organizations, as well as public sector, kind of get their arms around multiple identity sources as it pertains to service delivery. And those services are really all over the board. They can be common, services like we all use every day, Zoom and Slack and things like that, or they can be, highly customized public service systems developed for the public sector, which is why I think this conversation is so applicable. Always been focused there, very dynamic platform, allowing you to bring in different identity providers and truly orchestrate that process from what type of an identity you bring in, what type of factors you want to deploy, and ultimately launching them out into the service that they're of their choosing. And what's really changed in the last couple of years is the conversation we had, very early on about blockchain identity, and really the ability for us to generate verifiable credentials based on those identity attributes and allow individuals to control those and bring those into the verification process. That's really, we're seeing some exciting growth there. And really, it leads into the conversation we're going to have today, which is how do we better identify and how do we better use personal identities as they flow through these very disparate systems. So we've continued building out our product suite to do things like integration of multiple factors into our mobile digital wallet, including biometrics and things like that. That of course we're seeing a lot of interest in. And really just tried to make a complete ecosystem that an organization or an enterprise can really use to help them from where they are now and help them move into a more decentralized future.
And Mike, you're really on the front line of a lot of these headline grabbing type initiatives like mobile driver's license. And to remind everybody, this is something that Jeff and I talked a few weeks ago about: mobile driver's license starting out in the state of Georgia, which is my home state. Vaccine passports, right? That's on the tip of everyone's tongue. Jeff talked a little bit about the conference that we're speaking at next week, and we get to do some preparation. I would liken that to a vaccine passport, if you will, is a digitization of that vaccine card that we had. At least for me, it was stuffed in my wallet, and it's a much better way of going about it. But, digital diplomas, of course, digital citizen identity. And what I think is like super interesting is e-voting or I-voting, like internet voting, which, at least globally has got a couple of seed use cases that maybe you can speak to. But I guess I'm wondering, with you being on the front line, what are you hearing from your public sector contacts and customers about adopting these kind of transformative initiatives?
Yeah, Roy, great question. And, as I mentioned in the intro, it's incredibly timely because things are changing so fast. And that's just not typical. E-voting was something, obviously we've talked about it for years. And it's always been taken with, at some point, at some day. And now we have the change happening. We have the transformation happening as public sector entities gear up to work and interact virtually with their customers, right? Us as citizens and residents. We're now laying the foundation and building the framework that we can build really cool and creative solutions like e-voting on top of, because we're going to have the identification layer figured out. And I'm not saying that we've got that figured out today and everything is downhill from here. A lot of moving parts in that, and we're continuing to evolve and move the needle. But it's happening. There's absolutely no choice for our government to go back to a in-person world, right? There's just no choice to do that anymore. We have to transform those processes and provide some virtual interaction points, and that's going to allow us to really lay the foundation that we can build a lot of other creative and forward-moving processes around. You mentioned health passports. They're everywhere, right? We hate the word passports. Nobody likes to use health passports, but the reality is there are things happening. The U.S. is talking about opening borders again. Canada is opening the borders again, and all of those things, whether we like it or not, have a dependency of some kind of health check and status, and so those processes are being put in place now. And our hope is that more often than not, they're in some type of an interoperable format that can be used and in a more broad context than just this is my solution and that's your solution. So a lot of interesting things we're hearing. 2 years ago when we did, or whenever, how long ago it's been we did the podcast, if you would have asked me our primary customer composition, it was all larger enterprise organizations, and that has dramatically shifted in the last 24 months. We now have a ton of interest from government entities, public sector organizations wanting to do really cool solutions. And I say cool, but to them, it's like just staying alive, right? They have to deliver their services and they have to do it virtually. I think it's cool because we're finally pulling the consumer into that conversation. And of course, digital diplomas, education, we're working on a couple projects there that are incredibly exciting too, that we've actually got a state that's going to be issuing digital diplomas for all of their graduating seniors next year in an open format. How cool is that? We can use that credential for higher education, for workforce consumption, all over the place. And those types of things are happening. And it's just a really, really exciting time to be in identity. And boy, not many people have said that.
Well, it's certainly challenging for sure. We're talking about scale and scope, right, of a lot of different issues that are out there. And you kind of talked about this already, as the velocity with which public sector tends to move is not that quick, generally speaking. Might have been forced into it a little bit here, right, with the pandemic and things like that. But it's also expensive to get a lot of this kind of framework of tools and technologies and processes and all that stuff kind of put in place. I got to imagine that cost and the complexity has really kind of been pretty significant. And with the challenges that we see from budgeting and funding and all that sort of stuff, I guess what are your thoughts on how do you see people who are in the public sector who might be listening, might be decision makers, kind of navigating some of those key challenges?
Yeah, the key challenges, nobody can really afford lift and shift, and so we can't come in with a forklift solution, right? We focus a lot. And I know a lot of us in the industry spend a lot of time thinking about those bridges, those digital bridges. We have to provide a way to really understand where these organizations are. No sector more important than public sector, because it's so diverse and their customer base is so diverse. In an enterprise, we have the luxury of saying, here is our remote access process, and it will be adopted. You don't really have that luxury in public sector. You have to build your systems a lot more inclusive and open than that. So standards are huge. We have to find standards-based solutions, and we have to speak their language. So it's something that we focus on a lot here at IdRamp, is really just how do we provide the solution that brings value and simplicity and friction reduction in the traditional landscape today, and then allowing a modular bolt-on, a modular integration point to evolve into digital identity, and by supporting all of those standards. So we don't look at just one solution and say, this is the solution we need to sell. We try to come in and be inclusive of what's going on today, and then provide options and flexibility for moving beyond that. The ultimate goal, obviously, is that when we get to a purely decentralized world and everybody's carrying around all these credentials and verification, IdRamp really shouldn't be needed, right? Our goal is to put ourselves out of business someday, and that's going to be a long, long time coming. But that's where we need to get to, and we just try to provide that open platform. And I think that's the most important thing we can keep in mind, because you're right, it's moving faster than it ever has. It's costly and it's very complex to go in and replace these core systems. So I think we need to fracture that and really think small and modular. And that'll hopefully get us where we need to be. Consumers are going to come along faster than the providers, right? The consumers are incredibly dynamic. When you put a challenge in front of us as consumers, we find a way through it. And with the technology we have at our disposal today, I think that's going to be somewhat easier. The bigger challenge is going to be on the infrastructure side.
Well, I think that infrastructure poses kind of a unique challenge, right? Because a lot, when you think public sector, you think, for right or for wrong, archaic, kind of old, aging, crumbling infrastructure. Whereas that might be true for one country, but not another. I think of a country like Estonia, which does have digital ID. They do digital voting, and I think some folks look to them as sort of, is that the future, right? Maybe they don't have all the the issues kind of worked out of it yet. And I'm sure there's certain concerns around it, but I think there's a big challenge between starting fresh, or how do you take what you currently have and not alienate your existing citizens, for example, and pull them along into this new world, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of challenges. How do you basically re-identify or reissue a credential to literally every one of your citizens if you don't have some way to pull them along into whatever this new process or this new system looks like?
Yep. Yeah. It's that's a great point. And actually, in some ways, we're fortunate that we're not further along, and we don't have a lot of things that we need to go back and re-educate or for example, if we would build what I think is our ideal today in a digital ecosystem, would be very highly decentralized, using things like we talked about last time, which is blockchain. Rooting those credentials in public ledger networks that nobody has to own and maintain. But had we built this 10 years ago, right, we may not have had any choice but to use some of those centralized systems. So, in some respects, I feel like that. I feel like where we are now is right where we need to be, which of course is a natural feeling, and the technologies that have evolved and come along. Not to mention the power that we all now carry in our smartphones, gives us a really, really unique opportunity to not only do this, but do it right, and do it in a way that we can continue to build on, and not be staring at this thing in 5 years going, well, we screwed that up. Now what? And so I think we have a really interesting opportunity, and I can't say that we could have done this at any time prior to now. So maybe this is when it's supposed to happen.
Hey, Mike, when I think about public sector and IT in general, but specific to IAM, I think of, a heterogeneous type environment. So you have a lot of different technologies that need to communicate with one another. And they, in architectures that support that type of heterogeneity at scale, you need layers of abstraction, you need orchestration. And I know those are kind of industry buzzwords, but am I on the right track? Is that kind of what you see out there? And if so, kind of talk us through that. Talk us, about how that orchestration piece and the layers of abstraction fit into the overall picture.
Yeah, great insight. I mean, that's exactly right. And I mentioned this earlier. Standards are so important here. Being able to follow not only some new forward-facing standards that we try to achieve some level of interoperability, but also existing standards and how we interoperate with those identity silos that are filling our world right now. And we have to provide that interoperability, and we have to provide some control for us as residents and citizens to play some part in that, right? We have to be involved in those consent decisions. We have to be involved in what information we send. This is just so overutilized, but it's I walk into to order a drink at a restaurant or something, right? It's that identity information that I have to disseminate in order to determine my age. What do we do today? It's horrible, right? I give them my address, I give them my birthday, I give them all this other information because I'm presenting a paper credential. So being able to do that digitally, and I need to be in the middle of that process. So that's going to transform things, because we're not set up that way right now. All of our identity verifications are based on legacy systems that home run all of that information back to some mothership for identity verification, and we need to break that. In order to break that, we have to embrace all of those identity silos and make sure they can be included in this message as well. We can't just say, all right, that was yesterday and this is today. We don't have the luxury of making that break. We have to include those variety of existing solutions and really orchestrate them, right, at the risk of overutilizing that word. But we have to allow them to play in this journey and incorporate the ability to do that backhaul when needed, but then also some options to take that information and say, okay, I know we have to go back and get it now, but can we just credentialize that? Is there anything in here that we can just do to take the dependency off of that centralized connections? More often than not, the answer is going to be yes, there is. But sometimes, we may just have to go back and do that check. And that's just fine. We'll live with that and we'll evolve out of that. We can't just simply turn it off. So I like that question. It's great. And that is in my mind, right? That's orchestration. That's what it means. We've got all this stuff. We have to be able to embrace it and carry it forward into our vision of what, tomorrow needs to be.
I mean, you mentioned it, kind of utilizing that word orchestration. I feel like identity orchestration has a lot of buzziness around it in different areas, whether it's cloud, on-prem. Now we're talking kind of like sovereign identity, right? Things like that. I think there's a difference between talking about it, maybe POCing it, trying things out, but is there anybody doing this actually in the real world from a production standpoint where, there's an e-government project or something like that you can kind of point to and say, here's an example of how in the real world some government entity is kind of moving forward on this and kind of leading this identity transformation?
Yeah, and it's incredibly exciting. There are a couple. I mean, there are many, I'm sure, that have been going on for years. But without question, the most exciting is the announcement that was made just probably a couple of months ago now with Ontario. So Ontario released a digital identity strategy for all of their residents, citizens. Did an incredible job not only of designing the technology to be privacy preserving, all of the things that we hit on, before: secure, verifiable, sovereign control, and voluntary, right? So they hit on all those key points, but what they really did well is put the education together, right? So if you go out and find on their website, they have an entire section of the website about Ontario Digital Service and Digital Identity Service and how it's going to be used, where you can plan on using it, how you get it, what it means, and that is it's a great template for all of us to understand the thinking that's gone on there, and I think it is, that I do know, because we're kind of involved in the technology. I know the technology underlying this, and it's solid. It's great stuff. It is privacy preserving, and it will work. The scenario I just provided with proving of age, it'll have all of those zero knowledge proof fundamental technology innovations included in this deployment. So I would suggest we all go and take a look at what they're doing up there, because they're doing some really cool stuff. And again, we now have to build those bridges for all of their existing merchants and businesses to do to be able to contribute and participate, and try to give them an easier way to do that. To embrace this new digital ID as consumers evolve themselves or voluntarily sign up to be part of this digital ID ecosystem. So that's a great one. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of stuff going on in Europe. Germany has a great initiative over there for digital identity, but without question, the best I've seen from an organization perspective and education is what's going on in Ontario.
And Mike, if we're going to be doing all of these, future facing, I'd say cutting edge technology initiatives, mobile driver's license, internet voting, vaccine passports, it can't be based on passwords, right? Passwords are, I feel like our show is 99% around kill the password. Passwords suck. Everybody knows that. We can't build the future on the password. So, one, I guess, is that when you're talking about all these things, can we just assume the password is not going to be there? Or is that too timid of an assumption, or is that too uneducated to think that we're actually ready to get away from that? And then what is really holding us back from a passwordless future in your opinion?
Yeah, passwords suck. I've got T-shirts actually that we made up. It just has our logo and it says "Passwords suck." There is no. I'm gonna put myself out there a little bit here, but there's no excuse. If an application is written today that uses a password, then that is on the developer to own that. There is absolutely no excuse to use passwords today. Even if you use a simple verify my email, two-factor credential, or whatever, it's much, much better than requiring registration and the creation of a password. And every single day, I want to interact with some service. And guess what? The first thing they ask me to do is create a password. So I could not be more passionate about it. There's absolutely zero reason today that passwords exist other than our stagnant thinking and really the lack of forward momentum within the enterprise as the carrier. And I don't want to blame enterprise. I just think they're perfectly suited because they can demand it. And for the most part, everyone's moving that direction, right? In various different ways. Some better than others. But at the end of the day, if we remove them, not mask them, not put them in some kind of a manager application that fills it in for me, there's still exposure there. I want them gone, right? I have the ability to hold cryptographic connections between myself by, with help of my smartphone or whatever, and every website, every person, every car, everything I interact with. I have the power to do that. I'm just not doing it yet because the applications haven't been retrofitted to use it yet. But passwords have to go away. I mean, I hope we can get to a point where we don't even have to have this conversation. Like I said, it needs to become socially uncool, right, to create a password. And once that happens and the consumers go, well, I would buy your products or I would use your site if you didn't ask me to put in a password, then I think we can get somewhere. And I see that day coming. I just wish it were today.
Yeah, and I think that probably I think the bigger issue is exactly where you went, which is that there's still these edge cases where it's kind of like, oh, well, that's where a biometric wouldn't work or possession-based authentication wouldn't work. But I still think there are misconceptions related to, biometrics, whether it's facial scanning or fingerprint, that somehow your face is now turned into something that if there's a data breach, someone's going to have a picture of your face, right? So I think there are concerns about the use of facial scanning technology. I'm wondering, are there ways that we can still respect privacy and at the same time accomplish the same results? So fingerprints, voice match, or not using a biometric, using possession, but not using a biometric. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that's great. A great way to look at it, because there is a really, there's a lot of conversation around facial scan and biometrics in general, and there is a right way, there's a wrong way. That's all, of course, subjective. In my opinion, the biometrics that we have and possess are just factors. I would much rather use something that is, that's tied to me as a proof than a password or something I know. But again, that's put that in the right context. If it's me providing that biometric in a zero knowledge way that is basically just going to check some box and say, okay, yep, that looks like Mike, and then pass along the fact that yes, that's Mike, I'm okay with that. If it's passing that whole biometric, then there's issues there. And I think that a lot of that is the biggest challenge we're going to have is that we're, our challenge or our goal is to make this technology easy for the masses, and we can't explain. We just have to know that it's trusted. We can't explain what's happening. We just have to develop it in a way that the consumer is comfortable with what's going on. I think it's absolutely essential that we do some type of biometric factor in a much better way than we do today, right? I use biometrics to log into my bank account today. But if I scan my face and hand you my phone, you can do anything you want to do, right? Should that be the case? I would feel much better if my bank said, okay, during this session, we're going to scan, once every 5 seconds or 3 seconds or continual, we're going to continue to scan. And if I turn that phone away, it locks, right? That's how applications should be designed. And that's the use, in my opinion, of where, facial scanning technology and biometric factor type technologies should be used. So I think there's a huge role in biometrics in our future, especially in the future of digital identity. There's no question. We have a great way today to derive an identity. We can carry identities through credentials, and cryptographic connections. But we absolutely need those biometric factors in order to secure our applications and provide that, that last mile of defense. And things get much easier once we do that, right? We reduce fraud, we certainly elimination of passwords. We keep having that conversation, but they should go away in favor of who I am. We shouldn't have a persona at all that I create. I should just use me. So I think there's a huge role there, and that technology is evolving. I think we've seen, the market explode with biometric service providers. I know we've certainly seen our share of biometric service providers coming in and saying, hey, we really need a better carrier to carry biometrics into the identity market. So we've had some interesting conversations there, and I just think there's a huge future as biometrics really are assimilated into, or that's probably not the right way to say it, but as our biometrics are integrated into applications and the development of applications and authentication systems.
Here's a question for you, because I think biometrics is interesting. Obviously, that's an area that a lot of I think people are hanging their hats on, right? Whether it's voice print, face print, fingerprint. At some point in the future, maybe, and this has kind of already happened, there's this concept around inserting an RFID chip, right, into your wrist, your hand, your finger, whatever it may be. Here's my question, though. Is that biometric authentication? If it's a physical device that's inserted into you, would you consider that biometric authentication?
No, it's another factor. Now, depending on the scope of the integration of that device, if that device, when removed, can detect that it's been removed, then you can make an argument for biometric, right? If it says, oh, hey, I'm no longer in Mike, I'm now in Jeff, then absolutely there's a biometric component to that. But if not, then it's just another factor. It's of no more value. It's a convenience feature is what it is. It's of no more value for me from an identification perspective than pulling out my physical driver's license from that perspective. So I think when we talk about things like that, it's for convenience, right? It's almost like the pet chipping. There's a great analogy. Mike just associated RFID tags for people as pets. I'm sure that'll make a headline somewhere. But it really is a convenience thing, right? It's not about identification at that point. It's about reducing the friction from me and my day-to-day processes. And I mention this a lot to my team when we're trying to explain what I want the user experience to be. I'm going to date myself. You remember the old, Get Smart, when, Max Smart was walking, he was walking down the hallway and all the doors just opened and just got out of his way. That's how my identity journey needs to be, right? I want 100 different doors that are protecting whatever I'm trying to get to, but I don't want to have to interact with any of them. I just want them to get out of my way. And that's where I think biometrics provide something that we can't do even in, today, when we say password removal, at IdRamp, oh gosh, we can remove your passwords. We ask you to form a connection, maybe scan a QR code. Who wants? I mean, it's still a lot of friction, right? And is it better than typing in a password or having to go and look it up on a notepad stuck to my monitor? Absolutely, it's better than that. But that's not where we need to get to, right? Eventually, we're going to get to I'm just me. And I'm interacting with the things, everything in my way knows how to look for me and figure out who I am and just get out of my way. So that's my holy grail. I hope to see it in my lifetime, but we got to get going.
Fair enough. I feel the same way. I think it's a way around, right? Something like that. So, Mike, this has been a fantastic conversation. I want to be kind of cognizant of the time that we have with you, and this has been pretty heavy conversation too around public identity and a lot of the concerns and challenges that kind of goes along with it. So, what I want to do is start to pull us up to the surface and end on a little bit of a lighter note here with you. So, we're going to go with something non-identity related, and what I have for you is how many places have you lived, and what was your favorite one?
I am so boring. I have lived in a total of 3 places. And, my favorite, even though it was the shortest, and that's probably why it's my favorite, was Tucson, Arizona. And I love Tucson because I could drive up to Mount Lemmon and snow ski, and I could drive down and play golf in the same afternoon. And at that stage of my life, I didn't have a lot else to do but ski and golf, and it was great. It was absolutely awesome. I love Tucson. I was only there for a couple of years, and I lived in Omaha for a number of years. Did my first startup out there in the mid to late '90s, and what a great community! Just unbelievable people, businesses, thriving tech community. Loved it, but home is Iowa, and this is where I started, and probably where I'll finish. I love to get out of Iowa, as everyone in Iowa does, right? We love to go south when it's cold and north when it's hot, but it's where I've been. So yeah, I'm pretty boring. Only been 3.
Well, Tucson's not bad, right? I think I don't know anybody who would argue with, skiing during the day or and then going golfing. That seems like a pretty full life. I would be happy with that. I'm pretty boring too. I'm doing the math in my head, and I only go up to 4 different places. And I've been in the Chicago area for the vast majority of my life. That's so, I think when we want to caveat the one place, we're limiting it, I think, to a kind of a geographical city kind of area. I've certainly moved around the Chicago area quite a bit. I don't know if I can really kind of call it my favorite because it's really my only adult really kind of memory around it. I've been here since I was like 6 years old. So I don't get to see the mountains. We just don't have them here. It's all flat. It's all traffic. It's all construction. People are really nice. The food is really good. But man, I love when I get to travel and see different types of geography. So I love going to Monterrey, Mexico, for example. We've had some clients, we've made some friends down there. And every time I'm down there, I just kind of like sit and stare at the giant mountains. And the way that it looks is so fantastic. I love going to California as well for the same reason, but also for the ocean. I'm not much of an East Coast guy. I'm not a heat and humidity guy. So for me, I think temperature is very important as well, and low humidity. But I'm boring too in that 4 places, mostly Chicago, and maybe at some point in the future I will spread my wings and fly a little bit more. But like you, I love to travel and see other areas. Jim, what about yourself?
So I've moved around quite a bit. I count 9 distinct places that I've lived, many more addresses than just 9, but 9 distinct places. My favorite place to live, and I think this is, if anybody's looking for a place to move to in the United States, give Charlotte, North Carolina a consideration. It's like a small city with all the big city stuff. It's a home airport for what is now American Airlines, but it was US Air. They're putting in like light rail and things like that, but you can really afford to live there. So I definitely would recommend that to anybody who's thinking about trying to find their city. But I want to just mention one because I think it's a funny story, was that I lived in Middletown, Pennsylvania. Do you guys have any idea of what's in Middletown, Pennsylvania that's special? It's 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island is the one location in the United States where you had a major meltdown of a nuclear power plant. And so when that took place, there was a release of toxic nuclear gas from the tower. And, obviously it caused problems and made people want to not live there. So one of the things that the electric company did was they were giving electricity away for like 20 years after the accident. Well, I had moved to that town right before that ended. So I was able to get free electricity for a few months while I was there. And then even when they started charging for electricity, it was extremely cheap. So kind of a cool story.
Yeah, I'm glad you established a timeline there, because I thought maybe you were going to say you had something to do with the 3 Mile Island accident, and I was going to start to ask you some questions and maybe validate some things for us. But I like how you saved it at the end and said, "Oh, I was there towards the end of the 20 years of free electricity." So you kind of skated away on that one.
Yeah, right. Well, I have no problem dating myself, but I'm not quite old enough to have actually played a part in that.
You know, it's funny you mentioned Charlotte, because my wife and I are actually thinking about moving to that area. We've been looking at Asheville quite a bit, which is a little bit west of Charlotte. And I have a friend who lives north of the city of Charlotte. And, there's mountains. It's the Blue, I think it's the Blue Ridge Mountains are in that area. And the weather is a lot different in the Asheville area, sort of at the base of the mountains. So it's not quite as hot and humid, but
I'm not going to say anything bad about Asheville, but if we ever get back to being road warriors at the level that we were at, you'd be better off in Charlotte because you've got the international airport there. Otherwise, you're going to fly from Asheville to Charlotte or drive the 2 hours to get there each time. And Asheville's more expensive than Charlotte. At least when I was there, 8 years ago, it was a lot more expensive than Charlotte.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the one thing I would miss about moving out of Chicago is O'Hare, for all its faults and quirks, is I can get anywhere on one flight, pretty much. I very rarely have to take a connection unless I'm going somewhere super international. I mean, even Paris, London, Frankfurt, all those are spots I can get to in one flight, which is pretty nice. So I would certainly miss that.
I can get to Chicago. That's Chicago or Denver. So the only places I can get to. But yeah. I agree. Charlotte's a beautiful area. Brought to you by the Charlotte's Chamber of Commerce. It's a great area because it's so accessible. Like you said, there's airlines. You can get right in, but it doesn't feel like you're in a big city. I like it.
Yeah. So we turned this into a commercial for Charlotte. So nice job, Jim.
Exactly.
Go Charlotte.
All right. Well, why don't we start to wrap things up here? Mike, you've been great with your time, and we certainly appreciate spending it with us. Before we go, any kind of final thoughts or words of wisdom that folks can kind of take away from this conversation as they're thinking about, sovereign identity or public identity, or really anything we've kind of covered here that people should be thinking about?
Yeah. Don't overthink it. Just go. Right? The technology's there. There are plenty of people that can help you start the journey, get where you want to go. I see too many people that have been sitting on the fence for way too long, trying to wait for the right. Oh man, it's got to be perfect. I'm going to wait for this next thing, this next thing that comes out. That's going to get us where we need to go. Trust me on this. I've been doing this my entire professional career. There is no holy grail. We're not going to get to this perfect utopia. We got to go, and you have to start moving the needle. So move the needle, and we'll come back next year and we'll move it a little bit further. But technology is solid, and we're ready to help people take that journey. All of us collectively as an industry, ready to help people take that journey. So let's get going, and let's start changing our identity futures for the better.
That sounds like a great battle cry here. I'm ready to go into battle with you, Mike.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Jim, how about yourself?
Well, Jeff, I keep getting more and more won over on identity management with blockchain, decentralized identity. I'm not sure. I'm still at that point where it's like I can fully articulate the use cases, but it doesn't seem to be going away. And it seems to be kind of showing up as like, hey, here are some real world examples of how it can be useful. I think, getting rid of the password, biometrics, wallets, it's starting to connect. And even in this old brain of mine, the pathways are starting to, the diodes are starting to connect with one another. And, I don't know. I'm starting to get won over.
I imagine there's a lot of loose wires and stuff going on up there, but we'll leave that for another conversation. So I think that's a good spot that we can leave it for this week. I'm going to have some links in the show note for you to be able to connect with Mike on LinkedIn. You can learn more about IdRamp as well. They're at IdRamp, RAMP.com, and also put a link to Ontario's digital identity, because they have a great website that kind of really is probably one of the more transparent ones that I've seen as to how they've approached this. They've got a whole section really on their timeline of how they've explained how they're going about doing it. So I think it'll be interesting at some point, maybe if we can pull some strings and maybe get someone from that team over here to discuss, how they've gone about doing this. So definitely check them out. We'll have that link in the show note, as well as links for Jim and myself on LinkedIn. We're always happy to connect with folks who are listening. Send us show ideas, concerns, comments. Tell us we're stupid. Tell us we're great. Doesn't matter. Either one works for us. So with that, we'll go ahead and leave it. You can also find us on the web at identityatthecenter.com and on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. Mike, thanks so much for your time. Jim, thanks so much for your time. And we'll talk with everyone in the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.